Brenner, who's been a great leader on the state agency board, phenomenal force, and you're very privileged to have his leadership in the state. But Scott, you're a champion of medical research and science, which is particularly important if the chairman of the science committee doesn't particularly believe in evolution. So it is important to have some...
He says it's a theory.
Yes, he says it's a theory. But just to give an example of what scientists, many of you in the room, can do partnering with patient advocates, I'd remind you of what happened in 2002. That was in the end of 2002, there was a change in leadership in the U.S. Senate where the Republicans had just taken over control. And it was very important to JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which it was in on the international board for, to make sure that there was a mandatory supplemental additional appropriation in Congress that got through. The president had shut down all the committees of the House and the Senate to push money into Homeland Security, the new agency, and the war in Iraq that was ramping up for launch in 2003 in the spring. And what happened was that when they shut down every committee of both houses, the only way you get any appropriation through is you have to have unanimous consent of the House and the Senate. Very difficult task. So in the post-election cycle of 10 days, the scientists behind the juvenile diabetes research and the patient advocates got together. And there was a bill that we were able to get through the House of Representatives with unanimous consent. Fortunately, the speaker at the time had a staff member in Illinois who was a lifetime type 1 diabetic. So he understood that if this bill didn't get through, the NIH appropriations would be cut by 30% for juvenile diabetes. So there was a $1.5 billion bill, and half of it really was for type 1 diabetes, half of it was for keeping the clinics open for Native Americans. Basically about 50% of Native Americans over 50 in the United States on reservations have type 2 diabetes, and their clinics were to be wiped out by lack of funding. So the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation picked up that, and we had this joint bill. And talking about the areas of the country where Scott needs to see some marshaled support from patient advocates and scientists, we got down to the last couple of days before the end of this post-election cycle. And there's a Senator Nichols, who was the incoming House Senate Budget Chairman from Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma is not a hotbed of scientific support, but through a weekend effort, JDRF was able to get 25,000 different emails generated, but more importantly, the patient advocates working as informed advocates with the scientists from the type 1 research area and clinical area got to enough of the chairman of the boards and board members of major corporations in Oklahoma and CEOs in Oklahoma that they shut down the switchboards of Senator Nichols' offices in Oklahoma and in Washington, D.C. with calls. Now let me tell you, if the chairman of the board of the major corporations in the state and the CEOs of a majority of the major corporations in the state call about a bill, they're going to pay attention to that. So what I want to say to you is that we got through with Senator Nichols really releasing his hold on it. So we had unanimous consent of the U.S. Senate in 2 hours before the end of this special session, because scientists really informed and teamed up with patient advocates. There's a huge benefit there. We can reach states where you wouldn't expect to be great centers of science, but champions like Scott Peters are not going to prevail in a House or a Senate unless they have that kind of support. And each of you has an outreach to scientists all across this country. And I think it's important through your associations to really mobilize parallel patient advocate groups so that we can get a broad-based NIH